بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Uh, I was going over something today with my daughter. Of course, everything is homeschooled, and she's getting to the age now. I'm trying to not only introduce her to some of the things that are going to be required of her in a few years. She's 8, inshallah, going to be 9 in a few weeks. But I also want to introduce her to, some of the higher aspects of, why it is that we do what we do, and to kind of have a little fun and play with it. And the reason I also want to share this is because it's a strange thing that I hear today occasionally. Some people complain about all of this dry study of fiqh, all of this dry study of fiqh al-ibadat, all of this, very sterile study of the different acts of worship. This is, some of this may be due to one, I think the lack of exposure that Muslims have had to those communities that have gone before them from the past. And I know that there's a great resistance today to the idea of so-called traditional learning, and everything is good in the past and everything in the present and the future is horrible. And there's, I get it. There are some legitimate criticisms that are in there. You've had scholars, certainly in the recent modern period, like Ibn Ashur, who went quite in depth about a crisis of the education of Muslims, particularly the religious education, and so I get and understand all that. But there is also a value to the past. There's certain ways that people saw things in the past that they never would have seen in the way that we do today. One obvious reason is, the impact of, digital technology and, other things, and just the way that life was, kind of arranged and constructed. And, for me, I see the past as a great container of things to draw upon, not necessarily to ape and imitate, but certainly to draw upon, and serves, pays, in my opinion, it pays big dividends, right? So to go back to what I was saying, I think part of this attitude also comes from Muslims today not being really exposed to the classics, and that the publishing world has, released, I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about the kind of somewhat irresponsible, willy-nilly nature of publishers translating this or translating that text, right? Like, why are you even doing that, right? And there's many things that get missed in translation, particularly when it comes to the field of mustalahat, right, to some of the technical terminology, that when they translate things, all that just kind of gets thrown in the waste bin, and it's not even there, or these things are often implied, actually, and they're not drawn out. And the other thing is that, this has created a kind of book that we see today. If you go to the bookstore, let's say you want to look up a book of fiqh on whether it's from the Malikis or the Hanbalis, there's these books of like the fiqh وأدلته, right, and its various proofs. And people will open those up as a kind of reference volume, and that's that obviously has its place. That has its value, to just have a kind of mawsu'a, a kind of encyclopedia, and you open it up and you reference it. The problem is that what gets thrown away again in the kind of refuse bins is either the muqaddima or the introduction to these books are left out, which is where the real gems often lie in it, or they're not even there altogether, right? And therefore, the older style books, they essentially were able to have both of these. They were able to have kind of like a theoretical introduction and talking about some things, as well as the references to what's being discussed, and then also just the commentary. Sometimes we call the the hashia, like the footnotes, the commentary. It's really beautiful. So I thought I would share something just and how a kind of confluence here, right? So I wanted to have a teaching moment for my daughter. We're gonna pray dhuhr, right? And therefore to pray, right, about having tahara, about being in a state of ritual, purity. And in order to do that, we have to make wudu. So anyway, this little lesson kind of comes about, and as you can see, it will dovetail into many different aspects that beyond being simply a reminder and a good way for me to explain some things to my 8-year-old, right? It's actually quite beneficial and uplifting for me. And this is what I feel that you get from the classic mindset that sometimes because of our fast-paced life today and the reduction of everything, and I get it, some people not having access to the classical Arabic, which again, I can be a little bit tough. I recognize that it's a challenge, but to be quite honest, most of us, if we managed our time, we would definitely make progress. I mean, we might not become masters, but it's all about what we prioritize. So anyway, I'm not going to get on that soapbox for that. I just wanted to share how some things came together in a beautiful little lesson, not only for my daughter, but for myself. So this was from a passage here from a book by Imam al-Qafasi, who was a scholar from Tunis, going back to kind of a long time ago, a classic from the classic period of certainly North African Malikis, and he wrote a book called Lubab, al-Lubab, and it deals with breaking down, not just talking about fiqh, like how do you pray and fast and make wudu and all that stuff, but then he goes into what he talks about the bayan, the shurut, the sabab, those, like, what are, how do we even explain these things? What are their definitions? What are the conditions? As they relate to things that are either wajib, or have to do, or things that are prohibited, right? So anyway, we get to this little section here, and this was actually something I was just reading myself the other day, and he's in the chapter here talking about the bab of tahara, right? He's going in here talking about getting ritual purity, and just this little gem at the bottom that he happens to leave. So he says, "What hikmatu mashru'iyatiha." He goes into talking about, well, what are some of the wisdom we can talk about? Matter of fact, if you look here, he talks about what shurut al-sihha, and then shurut al-wujub, and all these other, okay, this is fine in terms of what are the things that constitute a thing, the conditions for it being sound and the conditions for it being necessary. But then he says, let me just talk about a little bit about just the hikmah and the wisdom of what comes about from being in a state of ritual purity, right? So he says, تدريب النفس على مكارم الأخلاق. He says that it is a tadrib for the nafs. What is tadrib? Tadrib, darraba yudarribu means in modern parlance, it means to coach. It means to condition. It means to habituate, right? So from the wisdom that we can take from these acts that are from the Sharia, mashru'iyya, right? From these acts that are from the Sharia that we do, are one to train us, to habituate our nafs in what though? Ala makarim al-akhlaq. To habituate and train us in the nobility and the noble aspects of akhlaq, of good character. So this is interesting, right? Good character, I mean, we have a saying in English, right? Cleanliness is next to godliness, right? And I would add an addendum that, godliness is next to what? Good character, right? So if one wants to habituate, train, or coach oneself, right? You may not have a sheikh that you sit with on a regular basis, right? You may not have a teacher. Okay, so fine. Maybe you don't have that. But you can still be murabbi to your own nafs. You can still instruct your own nafs of what? Stay in ritual purity. And there are numerous ahadith, statements from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as what we can glean from the Quran about the blessings and the beneficial nature and those things that come from staying in ritual purity. Now, that like literally every time you break your wudu, make a wudu. Every time you make your wudu, you break your wudu, make your wudu. Now you may say, man, that's kind of that's what? That's tadribun nafs, right? That's tadribun nafs, to make wudu every single time. Now, I'm not saying this is not hukm, but this is going into what? The hukmatu mashru'iyatiha, right? Going into some of the wisdom of what we find here. So if you find yourself, especially now, COVID-19, you can't sit with your sheikh, you don't have a sheikh, never had a sheikh, or whatever, you're trying to improve your relationship with Allah, right? Instill in yourself the nobility and the noble aspects of good character by disciplining yourself. And that can be easily, at least the first handhold to that, can be what? Make wudu. Stay in ritual purity. He adds, Imam al-Qafasi, rahimahullah, he says what? What ta'addubu, right? What ta'addub, right? As you can probably guess, right? Adab, look at the last three letters in the word there, right? What ta'addubu ma'al malik al-khallaqa, right? It's to be muta'addib, right? It's to be the person that does or strives for etiquette and good manners. Adab, akhlaq. As you can see, there's some synonyms here, right? So the person and the form of tafa'ala means what? It's bidaya bidun nihaya, or bidaya bidun kamal, right? It's like to begin and start a thing, but there's really no end to it. But there's no perfection of it. It's something you're going to continue to do, right? So it's to be mu'addib or muta'addib in this case, right? It's to have good manners and adab ma'al malik. Wa man al malik, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is the king, right? So when you go before a king, right? Hey, you guys watch all this Games of Thrones and all this other nonsense, right? What do people do when they go before the king? They suddenly, they're on the best manners in front of the king. So as a precursor, because of course, right, in these books, generally, the book of Tahara is going to come before the book of Salah, as Tahara comes as a precursor before the Salah. As he actually notes up here that Tahara is not a wujub. He differs in this idea that Tahara is shart fil wujub. He says, no. It's actually shart al-sihha, because it's a condition of the soundness of prayer, certainly, but simply because one makes wudu doesn't mean that one has to pray. And therefore, this is also important, right? Why am I going to read all this, right? Understanding that by tahara, or ritual purity, which is connected to what? Training, coaching, and habituating your nafs to what? The noble aspects of good character, and being on your best behavior and etiquette in front of Allah, the King and the Creator of everything, right? This means then that being in a state of tahara, it makes sense that it is not from the shart fil wujub, right? It's not a condition of what is mandatory. It's like, well, if you make wudu, you have to pray. No, right? But it does mean what? You're training yourself to be on good behavior, because if you're going to be in wudu, are you going to make wudu with the intention to go perform an evil act? This is insanity, right? So that's where you get to the hikmatu mashru'iyatiha, right? The wisdom around it. So what? At-ta'addubu ma'al maliki wal khallaq, right? To be on your best behavior in front of, right, Allah, who is the King, al-Malik, and the Creator of everything, al-Khallaq. And then he continues by saying, إِذْ يَنْبَغِي, and let me just jump over to the next part here. Or is it إذ ينبغي للعبد, and this is, so that the abd and يقف بين يدي مولاه, حسن الهيئة, right? So that the abd, so the one that is going to worship Allah, that they will, he says, عن يقف يعني عن يقيم, right? So that you stand, because waqafa means to stand, to give attention, could almost be like to salute, right? And it's similar to qama, right? So that you're going to stand literally between the two hands of Allah, in front of Allah, bayna yadayhi, right? Your master, right? With what? Husnu al-hay'a. Now, what is this word hay'a, right? That you're going to be in the best form, right? Husnu al-hay'a. And the other day, of course, listening to this craziness about the virgin birth of the lack of the virgin birth of Maryam, may Allah bless her, and of course her blessed son Isa alayhi salam. In that story, we get related to us in Surah Al Imran, what رسولا إلى بني إسرائيل, right? أن قد, he talks about what that is going to come to you, an ayah from your Lord, talking about Isa alayhi salam. He says what? أخلق لكم من الطين. I'm going to create to you from clay what? كهيئة الطير, right? Ka, as we know, right? هيئة الطير. I'm going to create you a bird, in the form of from clay, right? And then it's going to be, right? It's going to what? فَيَكُونُ طَيْرًا. It's going to become a real bird, meaning it's a form that you inhabit, that holds life, that life can be breathed into it or can be imbued in it, and it will become as if it really is that thing. So when he talks here about, standing in front of Allah, your master, with the best form, that is part of the mindset that one should develop when being in a state of tahara, of being tahir, right? Of being the one that is mutatahir, right? The one that endeavors to be tahir, to have ritual purity, right? This descending from this is going to be what? The tadrib, the coaching of oneself in the nafs, to discipline it, and to what? To be, ta'addub, muta'addib, to have good, excellent behavior and character with Allah, so that when it comes to your worship, you stand in front of Him with the best form, right? So that the preamble, or what leads up, not just going to the sink and making wudu, but throughout the day, right? In between those moments of salah, staying in ritual purity helps to keep one, so that when you do come to the prayer, it's not like you have to really abandon one thing for the other, like, I'm stepping away from the world and all of the bad habits, and then try to formulate this very rapidly. No, if you practice this, then when you stand in front of Allah, you will have what? Husnul hay'a, you will have the best form. And he says, obviously, tayyib rih, right? You want to smell good. And then خليا عن الوصف القبيح, right? And want to make sure that you don't smell bad, or you have all kinds of ugly things removed from you. So this is why do we read traditional classical books of fiqh? Because they give us more than information. They give us insights, and they translate for us the emotive and the emotional aspects of why we do things, far beyond just simply far beyond just simply looking these up like in a dictionary. So, and then lastly, there's this book by an Algerian scholar, al-Nashir في شرح وأدلة فقه متن ابن عاشور. It's a commentary basically on Ibn Ashir's take on Maliki fiqh, right? في الفقه المالكي. And it's by Sheikh al-Mukhtar al-Arabي, مؤمن al-Jaza'iri, ثم الشنقيطي. He's originally from Jazair. And what's interesting about what he says is now, likewise, he's going to also be in the section on ritual purity, more specifically here, wudu and the sunan of wudu, right? And he goes into talking about making wudu and the different aspects, particularly like washing the face and the mouth. And he says, well, he talks about, ishtiqaqiha wajhani. He says, what qila hiya min madmadani dahr ay arqani. So he goes into this idea of what is madmada. What is madmada? It's like he said, it's that you're going to put some water in your mouth, right? Al-ma'u fi fake. And he says, what tahrikaha ayahu bilisanika min shidqin ila shidq, right? So we came upon this word here that I thought was, really cool. It goes what? He said you're going to use your tongue to kind of, swish it around, min shidqin ila shidq. And this word here, shidq, is similar to sidq, right? To being truthful. And again, how do these things connect, right? The mouth, as we know, is one of the things, right? The lisan is one of those things that gets us in trouble. And therefore, part of wanting to discipline and train the tongue is, to maybe when making wudu, try to conceptualize, what am I doing here, right? And especially making wudu for when you're not going to actually pray, right? We already established that it is from the shurut al-sihha. It's from those things that are that make the prayer, sound, but not that make it mandatory, right? So just to be a person of adab, to be a person of tadbir, tadrib, right? To be a person of tadrib, mudarrib, to be a person that's going to be on good manners and what? In front of Allah, as if, he is as Allah, what? The king and the creator of everything. So when swishing this water around your mouth, right? Are we, I created this little rhyme for my daughter, right? To also teach her some Arabic, right? Where it says, min shidqin ila shidqin, right? I said, what about sidq ila sidq, right? So that, your mouth is what is going to often get you in trouble about not being truthful. Sidq, of being honest. And when you conjugate this root to tafa'ala, what you get tashaddaqa, right? And we already know about the verse in the Quran about al-mutasaddiq, al-musaddiqina wal-musaddiqat, right? And it's interesting that Ibn Mandur relates here. He talks about the mushaqqiq, the mutashaddiq, right? The mutashaddiq is the one, he's the one that's going to what? He's the one that's going to act very arrogant towards people, right? He's going to act very, very arrogant. I'm looking here. I'm going to look here for. He talks about tashadduq, right? And it's right here that he gets into it. He says what? Right? Is what arada bil mutashaddiq al mustahzi bin nasi yalwi shidqahu bihim wa alayhim. Right? It's to mock people. Right? One of the ways to be sincere, right? To approach being in front of Allah, to be on good behavior, to train yourself to not act arrogantly, to be mutasaddiq and not mutashaddiq, right? Because that's why I wanted to, give something to my daughter to rhyme, to play with, right? Right? Be mutasaddiq and not mutashaddiq, right? And as we read, right, in this verse where Allah says, what inna al-muslimina wal-muslimati wal-mu'minina wal-mu'minati wal-qanitina wal-qanitati wal-sadiqina wal-sadiqati wal-sabirina wal-sabirati wal-khashi'ina wal-khashi'ati wal-mutasaddiqina wal-mutasaddiqat, right? These right here upon the same wazn. And therefore, to be mutasaddiq and not mutashaddiq, right? Part of this we can relate. How do we achieve, right? Allah is giving us all of these wonderful qualities here. Inna al-muslimina wal-muslimat, what Muslim and mu'min and qanit and sadiq and sabir and khashi' and mutasaddiq. How can we try to envision how we can come to embody these, right? It's not to belittle the acts of wudu, but actually to see them as something, right, that we try to train and bring about ourselves through coaching, and to realize that we have been honored, right? I don't have it here on this page, but one of the things that Imam al-Qafasi talks about, he says that these aspects of taklif, of like when a person becomes of the age of responsibility, and that you have to do all these aspects of once you reach the age of responsibility. He says that no, it's not just about taklif, it's about tashrif. You have been honored by Allah, right? And that Islam is, as Allah often says, what وَأَتَمْتُ نِعْمَتِي عَلَيْكُمْ, right? He wants to what? Complete His favor upon us. It's a gift, it's an honoring, a tashrif, right? And the way that we can demonstrate that, obviously, is through the performing of the prayer, but before it and outside of it, right? Thinking about trying to maybe incorporate some of these things. So I just wanted to share a little funny, fun little lesson that we had today while getting ready to pray Dhuhr. وصلواته وسلامه على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.